Amigo is about a failed revolution. The Filipino people had been fighting for a long time with the Spanish, and then the United States came along and said, we'll help you beat the Spanish. And they had a one-day war with the Spanish, but made a secret agreement, and they said, okay, if you'll surrender to us, we'll make sure that the Filipinos don't come in and get back what you've taken from them. So what happens when a revolution fails very often is it starts to eat itself. They descend into civil war, sons kill fathers, fathers fight against sons, brothers fight against brothers. So it is a bitter movie, especially for the Filipinos. And I think it's bitter for Americans in that America was founded on an anti-imperialist idea. And one of the things that interests me about this era, this epic, is that this is the beginning of America trying to be an imperialist country.
At kung yung mga taga-baryo ay kakampi sa mga Amerikano, susunugin natin ang baryong yun!
What is your name?
Amigo. Soy muy amigo.
I think it's unavoidable when you make a war movie or a movie about an occupied country that there are going to be parallels with other wars. This could be a war, this could be a movie about France in 1943. It could be a movie about the American South during the American Civil War. You're going to have these same people, caught between two sides trying to, survive and maybe being, killed by either side, either their own side or the side that's occupying them. One of the things that struck me when I was doing the research for this is these phrases that we associate with later wars. Campos de reconcentración, concentration camps, which the Spanish had, and then the Americans started doing something a little bit like it. This idea of winning the hearts and minds of the people, this is a very old phrase that didn't just start in Vietnam. And this idea of the minute you've decided you can win, you start calling the revolutionaries bandits. So that they're not a legitimate force anymore. It's not really a war, and when you call them bandits, then you can do anything you want to them, which is very much like what America did with the terrorists in Iraq, is just say, well, they're not really prisoners of war, and they're not really criminals, so no law applies to them, so we can do anything we want. And it's not just the United States. It's every country, when they make war, they want to feel like they're right. And they even write down rules. In the movie, there's General Order 100, which comes from the American Civil War. So they feel like, and there's a lot of talk about we're still moral people and there are rules to war and everything. But basically, it's just to have a format to justify making war and doing whatever you want.
Tell them the people can do for the crop, just like always. Only that dike there, that's the deadline. Anyone steps past that without permission, we shoot them. And tell him, from now on, he can work his own damn field with everyone else.
It would please me to do this.
I think one of the things that is important about Amigo is it is in all these languages. And what the audience gets the opportunity to do is to see the point of view and spend time with these people with reading the subtitles. With all these different sides, and it's not just two sides. There are the Americans and there are the Filipino guerrillas, but then there's also the people in the village, and even the Spanish who have been defeated, who are leaving, and then the Chinese coolies, who are just these two guys who came there to work and make a living and go back to China and buy some land, and they're caught in this war too. None of those characters, even the mayor, the Amigo, sees the whole picture. They see their part of it, but the audience gets to see the bigger thing.
Any district or country occupied by an enemy stands under the martial law of the invading country. He's still head man, which means if there's trouble, it's his head.
What I find is, as I look into these stories and I look at the way people live, what I see is very few people who are heroic all the time. They have heroic moments, but then life goes on and they have to face another situation, and maybe they're not heroic in that situation. There are so many shades of gray in a war, and I think that one of the things I'm trying to do with Amigo is to have the audience think about those situations where what would it be if I was in an occupied country? Which is a very hard thing for Americans to think about because we haven't had that experience. You know, probably the closest we had to it in recent memory is 1860, and that was the Southerners when the North came down and occupied, you know, those states. What's heroic? What's patriotic? When are you doing something that's treason, and when are you just being smart because you're going to get everybody killed if you fight back? So I think these are very complicated, you know, things. They're not simple. And what Hollywood does very well is make things more simple. Most of the movies now are about superheroes or things that are fantasies. Very few dramas are being made in Hollywood. And so in some ways I feel like, well, there's room for all kinds of cinema, for fantasy cinema and more realistic cinema. And if you're going to make a realistic story, the reality is that it's very complex. It's not simple. It's not just good guys and bad guys.
Can't go picking your poo toss when you're blind drunk.
Somebody blind drunk? Eno.
You're shitting me.
Some old timer in the bill here makes it. I think it's some coconut.
I don't care if it's from buffalo piss. Hand it over.
I think in any war you get those people who get to this level where they don't care about the humanity anymore. Their job is to kill the other side. And it may be from bitterness, from having a lot of people killed. It may be from pure hatred. In the case of the colonel that Chris Cooper plays, he's somebody, when I explained the character to him and to Garrett Dillahunt, who plays the lieutenant, I said, the lieutenant here has been in this war and he's seen hundreds of dead people. The colonel, who came from the American Civil War, has seen thousands of dead people. So one more dead local guy that he hangs is nothing to him. Those people do become larger than life. They're outside of life, which is why they can take life so easily. These characters don't always tell the truth. So you can't just listen to what the characters say and know what's happening. I do think that I try to have the secondary characters be more complete than the primary characters. And so in some ways that's a very different thing for film, where you usually have the 2 or 3 leads and then everybody else is an extra. And that means that the audience has to pay a little bit more attention, because it's like, well, wait a minute, maybe I have to pay attention to this guy. Who's he? What's he doing?
This comes from the top. Elections will be held.
Paparilin na ba nila ako?
Pagkaroon ng eleksyon, ikaw muli ang ating kapitan del barrio.
Election?
There's so much in this movie that's about communication. People don't speak the same language. The only interpreter is this priest who has his own agenda and doesn't always interpret the way that it was spoken. There's a lot of imagery of this wire being the way the Americans communicate. And that eventually, at what point does a revolution, when it's failed, become destructive? You know, it's not gonna win the war. You're not gonna get your way. When does a war, and we all have to ask this in difficult wars, when does a war become something that's doing more harm than good? You know, we had to face this in Vietnam and Iraq and the United States. Other people have civil wars that are never resolved. They just stop because everybody's so tired, and they've got to that point where they realize this isn't worth it anymore. We're not going to win, and we're not going to get what we can, and we can only destroy ourselves, not just the other person. And for me, that cutting of the wire by the guy's son is such a, for me, kind of a metaphor of what happens when a fight goes on too long, when a revolution goes on too long, and it's clear you're not going to win, but you keep going, you start to destroy yourself.
Kung may kailangang ipagawa ang mga Amerikano, siya ang una nilang nilalapitan.
Pero namumuwersa sila.
Kung may gusto silang ipagawa at iutos,
Gawin po ang anumang gusto niya.
I have to live with these people.
No, Lieutenant! You gotta make war on these people!
can't beat us. I don't know why they even bother.
Lee Maley Briones, my cinematographer, had shot movies in red camera before, had shot commercials in it. And she, with that experience, could sit with me and talk about what time of day do we shoot, what situation do we shoot, where do we point, what lens do we put on, you know, can we use the smoke that's always around a village like that, you know, to our advantage. So it actually, it looks really good. There's only about 3 shots that I'm not crazy about, you know, caused by the red camera. The other thing that you have to do with a digital camera is the digital camera sees such detail that you can't get away with fabrics that are not from the period. So you can't get away with synthetics. You know, if you're close to the camera at all, you have to use the real stuff, real wool, real cotton, whatever the clothes were really made of, or it's just not going to look right. It was hot and it was physical, but the great thing for me is that we made a village in a jungle and I could shoot 360 degrees. There was nowhere that I couldn't point the camera because the jungle would hide our people who were not working at that moment or our equipment or whatever. So this is a movie that I feel like I was able to get a lot of depth in. So there's almost always something happening in the background and then something happening in the far background. And very often I could shoot with 2 cameras and have them moving all over the place without worrying that I was going to see all our equipment or something from the 21st century that didn't belong there. Very often there are failed revolutions before there is a successful revolution. You know, there are failures, but they're not really failures if they move you forward, and especially if what they leave is a lot of people, especially young people, who think this shouldn't be. When I get older, when I get a chance, I'm going to push this agenda forward, whatever it is, because this is what's right for people. So what I wanted to leave you with is this very sad thing of here's this boy, giving up his rifle and taking money for surrendering, when if he had done that a day earlier, his father would be alive. But there's this idea in his head of resistance. And it took the Philippines a long time, but they got their independence eventually.